Field Amendment. This session is being filmed by Deep Dish TV. I want to just acknowledge our thanks to them. We still have the need for our own media. We have some of it, but it's fragmented. But it's great that we have had Deep Dish TV around for a very long time. And we're very happy that there's going to be more even at this conference. Strickland took my introduction to our next speaker, but it's okay because I know my next speaker pretty well. Bill Tabb, William Tabb, is an emeritus professor of economics at Queens College and at the Graduate Center. He is also a founder of the Left Forum and its predecessor. He's got a new book, the title of which I hope he'll tell you because I don't have it here anymore. But he's really in many ways been a stalwart of this institution, the Left Forum. And before he came on, when he gave me this thing, time, when I said he's our internal cop, I have bad internal time consciousness. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bill Tabb.
Strickland said to give this to you.
Yeah, I don't need it anymore.
I'll give you a 3-minute warning and I'll go to the end of what I want to say.
That's okay.
Yeah. The theme of this year's Left Forum is inspired by events that took place only a few blocks from here and as far away as Tahrir Square, and are taking place in Greece and Spain and Moscow and all over the world. And we are part of that movement. When we say occupy the system confronting global capitalism, it calls for the kind of historical imagination and searching analysis of the system that we're going to be spending the next 2 days doing. And of course, beyond this conference, we've got a lot of work before us. To occupy the system is first to be aware of the system as a system, and I think that's come through in the speakers who preceded me, a system of unequal privilege and control. To occupy the system requires we occupy the narrative of public debate, which Bill spoke about so well. This is something the Occupy movement has achieved to a remarkable extent, changing the conversation, because what the right has done, it has moved people's attention away from the current crisis, which comes from the deregulation of Wall Street, the greed of the 1%, and says it's the deficit, it's unions, it's public workers, it's people who are on food stamps, and that we have a food stamp president. Their ability to do this will continue until there's a force strong enough to tell the truth loudly, boldly, and that is our job. What I want to do is to talk about some of the trends that have been going on and to give some numbers that are important for the American people to understand. The first is that for the last decade, there has been no growth in jobs in this country. There are as many jobs today as they were 10, 11 years ago, but the population has grown. It's grown substantially. There has been no increase in income for the 90%, if not 99%. That we are moving away from the world of the post-war period to an oligarchical system that can only be reversed by a powerful mass movement. Just 1% of the income growth in the last 10 years went to wages. 88% went to corporate profit. Do you have any idea what that means? You do. But Americans have got to pay attention that 93% of the income in 2010, which is the last year we have data for, 93% of all the income increase went to the top 1%. That is the 99% shared 7% of the increased income. This has been going on for a very, very long time. If we consult the CIA World Factbook on the subject of economic inequality, the U.S. is behind Cameroon and the Ivory Coast. We are ahead of Uganda. Partly because of Occupy, the press has done a better job reporting disturbing statistics. A few months ago, the Associated Press reported, squeezed by rising living costs, a record number of Americans, nearly 1 in 2, have fallen into poverty or are scraping by on earnings that classify them as low income. The latest census data depicts a middle class that's shrinking as unemployment stays high and the government safety net frays. The new numbers follow years of stagnating wages for the middle class that has hurt millions of workers and their families. It turns out 97 million Americans fall into the low-income category as earning between 100 and 199% of the poverty level. Some of you are in this room, and millions more are our brothers and sisters in this country. It's not just the current crisis, and it's important to understand that. Not only did total employment not grow, that labor force participation as a result has gone down for every income group. That is, fewer people are in the labor force. They are surviving, they've dropped out, and the only group that is where more people are working in that age category are the over 65s, because they can't afford to retire, that their pensions have been taken away by the corporations, and that they can never retire. And people coming up also with 401ks that they have very little money on will not be able to retire. We are moving backward at a very rapid rate. Things are particularly desperate for minority young people and generally those without a high school degree. For black men, 1 in 3 spend some time in prison, 1 in 3. And for those who don't get a high school degree, 2 in 3. Between 1969 and 2009, the median earnings of men who completed high school but did not go to college fell 47%. So when we look at women and, you know, they're coming up, they're not coming up. They're still getting about 80 cents on the dollar that men are getting. But it's that men's earnings are going down, and they're going down in real terms after inflation at a rapid. So the trend has been bad for decades. From 1973 to 2006, I choose 2006 because that's the year before the current financial crisis began. Productivity, that's output per worker in our country, productivity rose 80%, but real wages grew by less than 1%. That is, it's all going to capital. It is not going to the workers who produce the wealth of our country. This is the reality that has to be made clear to the working class of America, and they have to act on it. This has been going on for decades under Democrats and Republicans. During the Clinton administration in the 1990s, the top 1% got 45% of all the increase of income going to the 100% of us. The 1% got nearly half of it, 45%. Of course, things were better under George W. Bush. The 1% received 73% of all the income growth. These are astounding figures, and they represent a change so that now the richest 1% has more wealth than the bottom 90% of us. They control, they own, and of course it's not the 1%, it's the 1/10 of 1%, the 100th of 1%. It is a ruling class that has grown richer and powerful so that our choices in an election campaign depend on which billionaire is keeping Ron Paul or Newt Gingrich or my favorite, the guy in the sweater vest, Santorum. Their campaigns are basically, I think it's 22 billionaires and millionaires, multimillionaires, have paid for 60% of the election so far. You're talking about a concentration of wealth and power. Now, what they have done is said, no, the problem is the budget crisis and that Obama's the food stamp president. And it is true that almost 15% of the country now relies on food stamps. 15% of Americans rely on food stamps. It has increased dramatically because people's incomes have fallen. More people are working full-time, 2 and 3 jobs, and still qualify because they're at the poverty level. What is going on is undoing the welfare state, undoing the New Deal, undoing the Great Society, and trying to push us back to a period before progressivism had triumphed. Now, it's interesting. Social Security and Medicare are being challenged, but the Republicans have backed off on cutting them in their budget proposal. They're proposing cutting $6 trillion, which will devastate all the social programs in America. But they're leaving Social Security and Medicare for 10 years. They're doing that because the base of the Republican Party is old, is white, is rich, or richer than the rest of us, and they will fight, keep your hands off our Medicare. They think they're entitled to that. 40% of the labor force, approaching 40% today, are African American, Hispanic, and Asians. That is, our multinational working force is increasingly, and our country will soon be by 2050, majority minority. That is, white folks will be no longer the majority of people in this country. In the workforce, it'll be even more so. So you have the situation where the people whose communities are being devastated by these cuts are the ones who are going to support these white folks in their retirement and pay for their health care. It is an interesting phenomenon. The Republican base knows that government workers are disproportionately black because the government has been an equal opportunity employer, and the middle class, the black middle class, is heavily dependent on jobs in the public sector. So not only are programs that are going to help those most in need, which in our racist society are heavily Hispanic blacks, not only the recipients, but the government workers are. And so cutting the budgets, cutting the number of employees, and also cutting the unions, because we now have a situation where there are more union workers working for the government than in the private sector. And so in going after public workers, they're going after the strongest part of the labor movement, which is the strongest part of the organized progressive movement in this country. These are incredibly important developments and changing totally the nature of our society. On the deficit, the government spends 24% of our gross domestic product, but it only collects 15% of our gross domestic product. There is a deficit between 25%, which we spend, heavily military and other things we don't necessarily proud of, but collecting only 15% in tax revenues. This is overwhelmingly because taxes for the rich have been cut, and taxes for corporations have been cut, and equally important, tax avoidance through tax havens is now business as normal, usual, whatever. We know Mitt Romney, when he was forced to release his tax returns, and Americans became acquainted with the use of Swiss banks and the black tax holes in the Caribbean, where Mitt keeps a good bit of his money, he's not alone. That these people do not pay taxes both because the rate has gone down dramatically and because they avoid it in this way. Citibank alone had over 400 tax haven subsidiaries, 91 in Luxembourg, and another 90 in the Cayman Islands. Well, there, of course, is more to say on all of this, but let me conclude. Only, of course, a left movement that's powerful enough, like the one that was built in the 1930s, under circumstances that are not that different than they are now. It took the people in the 30s a few years to get used to the fact that this was going to go on unless they organized, unless they resisted, unless they demanded change. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the most class-conscious organizations in America, in opposing the New Orleans Living Wage Ordinance, filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court of Louisiana in which they declared, and I quote, "Living wage proposals are economically unfair because they change the basis on which our economy operates." They, of course, are right. In a similar tone of alarm, Frank Luntz, perhaps the most important Republican strategist alive, told the Republican Governors Association 2 months after Occupy Wall Street took up residence in Zuccotti Park, quote, "I'm so scared of this anti-Wall Street effort. I'm scared to death. They're having an impact on what the American people think of capitalism." He was right. He was right, too. And these people are right to be scared. When an outfit called Global Scan began tracking people's views in 2002, 4 in 5 Americans saw the free market as the best system in America for the future, for the world, and all that. This, by the way, was the highest level of support among all countries in the world in which they track opinion. Americans love free enterprise. Support started to fall away and has plummeted, so that now fewer than 3 in 5 Americans see the free market system as the best system for the future. The head of the outfit that does these surveys said, "This is not good news for American business." He, too, was right. To conclude, the thought behind Occupy the System is that we need to call attention, and this is a point Strickland made, but I want to make it again. Each of our areas of struggle for quality health care, education, to save the environment, to end the systematic imprisonment and warehousing of black men, to choose full employment and equal opportunity, are all connected. We live in a toxic system that must be confronted in its global dimension. Our problem is not with abuse of a sound system. The problem is the system. The goal and I'll end on this with a quote from a document, it's old, written in 1848 by these 2 guys, is a society in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Solidarity.